It was one of those days that just felt heavy, The kind where the gray sky seems to press down on you, and even the familiar streets of the precinct feel a little more weary than usual. Officer Maya was finishing up a long, mostly uneventful shift, the kind filled with paperwork and minor complaints. She was just about to call it a day, looking forward to getting home, kicking off her boots, and forgetting about the world for a few hours. But as she walked towards her patrol car, something made her pause. It wasn't a sound, really. It was a feeling. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck that tells you you're being watched. She turned, scanning the quiet, mostly empty parking lot. And that's when she saw him, a little shadow, trembling by the dumpster. It was a German Shepherd puppy, so young he still had that clumsy, oversized paw look about him. He was all alone, ribs just slightly too visible under his black and tan fur. Their eyes met, and instead of running away, he took a hesitant, wobbly step forward. Then another. Maya's heart, which had built up a pretty tough shell over the years, gave a little twinge. "Hey there, little guy," she said softly, her voice dropping into that gentle tone we all reserve for vulnerable creatures. "Where's your family?" She assumed he was just a stray, maybe lost from a nearby home. She figured he was following her because he was hungry, because humans often mean food. She went to her car, found an old protein bar, and broke off a piece, placing it on the ground. He sniffed it cautiously and ate it, but his big, intelligent eyes never left her face. When she stood up to leave, thinking her good deed was done, he was right there at her heels. She'd take a step, he'd take a step. She'd stop, he'd stop, sitting down and tilting his head as if to say, "Well, aren't you coming?" This wasn't just a stray looking for a handout. This was different. There was a purpose in his eyes, a silent, desperate urgency that she couldn't ignore. This is where the story should have ended, right? A kind officer, a cute puppy, a happy little rescue. But this puppy, this tiny, determined soul, had other plans. He wasn't just asking for help for himself. He started to whimper, a low, anxious sound, and instead of following her toward the warm, lit building of the precinct, he trotted a few feet in the opposite direction, toward a row of old, abandoned warehouses. He'd stop, look back at her, and let out another little yip, as if he were saying, "No, you don't understand. It's this way. Please, you have to come this way." The drizzle started to pick up, a cold mist that clung to her uniform. Logic told her to scoop him up, take him inside, and let animal control handle it in the morning. But something about his determination, the sheer, unwavering persistence in his little body, struck a chord deep within her. It was that gut feeling, that sixth sense that every good officer learns to trust. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a plea, against her better judgment, against the clock that said her shift was over. She made a decision. "All right, buddy," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Show me." And so she followed him, the little German Shepherd puppy, who she'd started to think of as her tiny, furry guide, led her away from the safety of the parking lot lights and into the growing gloom. He moved with a certainty that was unnerving, his nose occasionally dropping to the wet pavement as if confirming a scent trail only he could detect. They moved past chain-link fences rattling in the wind, past buildings with windows like hollow, blind eyes. The world grew quieter, the only sounds a squelch of her boots and the puppy's panting. Her hand rested on the flashlight on her duty belt, her senses on high alert. What was she doing? Following a puppy into an industrial wasteland on a hunch? He finally stopped in front of a particularly dilapidated warehouse, its main door slightly ajar, a dark slit just wide enough for a small animal to slip through. The puppy scratched at the metal door and let out a single, sharp bark, then looked at Maya, his entire body quivering with anticipation. This was it. This was where he needed her to go. Her heart was hammering against her ribs now, a steady, nervous drumbeat. She unclipped her flashlight, the beam cutting a stark white path through the darkness as she pushed the heavy door open just enough to slip inside. The air inside was thick and stale, smelling of dust, old oil, and something else, something faintly metallic. The beam of her light danced across the vast, empty space, catching on forgotten machinery and piles of debris. And then the light fell on a shape huddled in the far corner. It wasn't another animal. It was a heap of old blankets. And from underneath those blankets, she saw a small, slow movement. The puppy let out a happy yelp and dashed forward, disappearing into folds of the fabric. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Her feet felt rooted to the spot as she slowly, cautiously, moved the beam of light closer. And that's when she saw it. A hand, pale and small, reached out from the blankets and weakly patted the puppy's head. And in that single heart-stopping moment, as her light illuminated the full, devastating scene, Officer Maya felt the world tilt on its axis. The professional composure she'd worked so hard to build shattered completely, and a single, hot tear traced a path down her cheek. Because what she found in that dark, lonely warehouse was a story she never, ever expected to find. The world seemed to shrink to the circle of light from her flashlight. Everything else, the distant hum of city traffic, the cold seeping through her uniform, the lingering thought of her warm car, just vanished. All that existed was that small, pale hand and the little German Shepherd puppy, who was now frantically licking the fingers, his whole body wiggling with a mixture of relief and urgency. Maya's training kicked in a split second before her emotions could completely overwhelm her. "Police." "It's okay, you're safe now," she said, her voice surprisingly steady even as her hands trembled. She rushed forward, her boots crunching on the gritty concrete. Kneeling, she gently pulled back the edge of the dirty, damp blanket. Huddled underneath was a child, a little girl. She looked no more than 6 or 7, her face smudged with dirt and etched with an exhaustion that no child should ever know. She was clutching the puppy to her chest like a living teddy bear, her eyes wide with fear that seemed ancient. They weren't crying. They were just hollow. It was a look Maya had seen in victims of terrible accidents, a state of pure, stunned shock. "Hi, sweetheart," Maya whispered, holstering her flashlight, so her hands were free and less threatening. "My name's Maya. I'm a police officer. I'm here to help you." The girl didn't speak, just stared, her grip tightening on the puppy's fur. Maya's mind was racing, a checklist of procedures running on autopilot. She quickly keyed her shoulder radio, her voice low but clear. "Dispatch, this is 7 Adam. 12. I need immediate medical assistance and backup at my location, the old Miller warehouse on Industrial Drive. I have a juvenile female, approximately 6 years old, conscious but non-responsive. She appears to be alone and is in significant distress." As she gave the coordinates, her eyes never left the girl, scanning for any visible injuries. She looked thin, frighteningly so, and her clothes, a thin t-shirt and leggings, were utterly inadequate for the cold, damp air of the warehouse. How long had she been here? A day? 2? As she waited for the distant wail of sirens, Maya tried again. "Are you hurt, honey? Can you tell me your name?" The girl just shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. But then her eyes darted towards the puppy, and then back to Maya, and in that glance was a whole unspoken story. This puppy wasn't just a pet. He was her protector, her messenger, her only friend in this terrifying situation. He was the one who had refused to give up, who had gone out into the world to find help when his little human couldn't. The bravery of that small animal, leading a giant stranger back to the scary place because he knew it was their only hope, was enough to bring a fresh lump to Maya's throat. The sirens grew louder, their sharp wails slicing through the silence and finally pulling the girl's gaze away. She flinched, pressing herself further into the corner. It's okay, Maya soothed, positioning herself between the girl and the approaching noise. "That's the help I called. They're coming to make sure you're warm and safe. Nobody is going to hurt you." The first paramedic, a woman with a kind, calm face, entered the warehouse with a kit. The girl watched her with the same terrified intensity. It was the puppy who broke the tension. He gave a happy little yip and wagged his tail at the new person as if to say, "See? I told you I'd find the good guys." While the paramedic, Sarah, began a gentle assessment. Speaking in soft, reassuring tones, Maya stepped back to give them space. Her partner, Officer Miller, had arrived too, his face a mask of grim concern. "What have we got, Maya?" he asked quietly. She just shook her head, her eyes still glued to the scene. The little girl was now allowing Sarah to wrap a foil blanket around her shoulders, but she still hadn't uttered a single word. The puppy sat steadfastly by her feet, his job not yet done. "I don't know, Mike," Maya murmured. "I just don't know." She won't speak. The dog, he found me. He literally led me right to her. Back at the precinct, under the bright, sterile lights, the mystery only deepened. The little girl, now cleaned up and wearing a sweatshirt from the Lost and Found that swamped her small frame, sat in a quiet interview room with a child psychologist and a female detective. She had a name now, Lily, but that was all they had been able to get. She clung to a stuffed animal the paramedics had given her, but her eyes constantly searched the room until they landed on the puppy, who was now curled up on a blanket in the corner, exhausted but watchful. He'd been given food and water by a soft-hearted desk sergeant, and a quick check by a vet confirmed he was a little underweight but otherwise healthy. Maya stood on the other side of the one-way mirror, her arms crossed, watching. They had run Lily's name and description through every database. No missing persons report matched her. No frantic parents had called in. It was as if this little girl and her heroic dog had simply appeared out of thin air. "It doesn't make sense," Mike said, standing beside her. "A kid this age, alone for who knows how long, and not a single person has reported her missing?" The implication hung heavy in the air between them. The neglect they were seeing wasn't from being lost for a few hours. This was a story of long-term silence. Later that night, as Maya sat at her desk trying to file the mountain of paperwork the incident had generated, she couldn't shake the image of Lily's face. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a deep, unsettling worry. Who was this little girl? Where did she come from? And what circumstances had led to her being hidden away in a cold, abandoned warehouse with only a puppy for company? The most chilling question of all was the one nobody could answer. Was someone looking for her because they loved her and were sick with worry? Or was someone looking for her for a much, much darker reason? The little German Shepherd puppy, now sleeping soundly on the blanket beside her desk, had done his part. He had brought his friend to safety. But as Maya reached down to gently stroke his soft, sleeping head, she knew with a cold certainty that their journey and hers was far from over. The real mystery was only just beginning. The neighborhood was nothing like Maya expected. It was quiet, almost too quiet, with neatly trimmed lawns and houses that looked like they'd been plucked from a catalog. It was the last place you'd imagine a story of fear and escape beginning. The old man, Mr. Peterson, was waiting on his porch, his face etched with worry. He pointed a trembling finger down the street. It was that way. She was hurrying, almost running, I'd say, holding that little dog tight, like her life depended on it. Maya and Mike followed his gaze to a house at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was slightly more secluded than the others, shrouded by a couple of overgrown pine trees. The blinds were drawn tight on every window, giving a closed-off, secretive feel. It was house number 142. It looked peaceful, but after seeing Lily's drawing, Maya saw it differently. She saw the lopsided box. She saw the source of the black scribble. They decided to approach carefully. This wasn't a raid. It was a knock and talk, a fishing expedition. They had no evidence of a crime, only the silent testimony of a traumatized child and the instinct of a puppy. As they walked up the driveway, Maya noticed something Mike missed. Tucked behind a rain gutter, almost out of sight, was a small, cheap-looking wireless security camera. It was pointed directly at the front door. "Mike," she said under her breath, nodding towards it. His eyes followed, and his posture subtly shifted. Someone was watching. Mike knocked, the sound unnaturally loud in the still air. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, the faint sound of a lock turning. The door opened just a crack, held secure by a chain. A single eye, set in a man's face, peered out at them. He looked to be in his late 40s, with a receding hairline and the tired look of someone who worked from home. "Can I help you, officers?" His voice was calm, polite even, but there was a tightness around that one visible eye. "We're following up on a report about a missing child in the area, sir," Mike said, his tone easy and professional. "We're just checking with all the residents. Have you seen a little girl, about 6 years old, in the last few days? Possibly with a small German Shepherd puppy?" The man's I blinked slowly. A child? No, I'm afraid not. It's usually very quiet on this street. Just me here. I work odd hours, keep to myself. His answer was too smooth, too rehearsed. He hadn't shown an ounce of surprise or concern at the mention of a missing little girl. Maya's gaze drifted past him, into the sliver of the house she could see. The interior was dim, but she could make out a hallway. It was clean, obsessively so. There were no family photos on the walls, no clutter, no signs of a child living there at all. It was the home of a ghost. But then her eyes caught something. Lying just under a small table in the hallway was a single, brightly colored plastic hair clip. It was the kind of thing a little girl would wear. It was completely at odds with the sterile, grown man feel of the place. The man followed her gaze, and his demeanor shifted instantly. The polite mask slipped, replaced by a flash of something else. Panic, then anger. "I told you, I haven't seen anyone," he said, his voice gaining an edge. "Now, if you don't have a warrant, I'd appreciate if you'd leave me alone. I have work to do." And with that, he shut the door, the lock clicking back into place with a sound of finality. Back in the car, the air was thick with tension. "He's lying," Maya said flatly, her hands gripping the steering wheel. "Did you see that hair clip?" Mike nodded, his face grim. "Yeah, I saw it, and I saw that camera. He knew we were coming the second we stepped on his property." They had a name now, too, from a quick check of the county tax records. The house was owned by a David Miller. Back at the precinct, the investigation kicked into a higher gear. They couldn't get a warrant based on a feeling and a hair clip, but they could dig, and dig they did. David Miller was a ghost online. No social media, no digital footprint to speak of. He worked as a freelance IT consultant, which meant his comings and goings were hard to track. But as they pulled his financials, a pattern emerged. For the last 3 years, large, regular cash withdrawals, always just under the amount that would trigger a bank report. It was as if he was deliberately trying to stay off the grid, to leave no trace. Meanwhile, at the foster home where Lily was staying, a small breakthrough happened. But it only deepened the mystery. The foster mom had given Lily a bowl of apple slices. Lily, without thinking, had carefully cut each slice into smaller, identical pieces with a plastic knife before eating them. It was a strange, ritualistic behavior for a child so young. When the foster mom gently asked why she did that, Lily had looked up, and for the first time, she spoke 2 quiet, chilling words. The rules. Maya felt a shiver when she got the call. The rules. What kind of rules did a little girl have to live by in that sterile, silent house? Rules about how to cut her fruit? Rules about being seen and not heard? Rules enforced by a man who watched his front door with a camera and kept his life meticulously hidden? The puzzle was coming together, but the picture formed was more horrifying than she had imagined. They weren't just looking for a neglectful parent. They were unraveling a life of quiet, controlled terror. And David Miller, the ghost in the house, now knew the police were circling. The race was on, and the terrifying question was no longer just about where Lily had come from, but what David Miller would do now that his secret was in danger of being exposed. The next 48 hours were a tense game of cat and mouse, played in the shadows of databases and quiet surveillance. A patrol car did slow drive-bys of David Miller's house every few hours. The blinds remained drawn. His car, a nondescript sedan, never left the driveway. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath. Maya spent every spare moment at the station, the puppy, now officially named Sergeant, sleeping at her feet, a warm, living reminder of what was at stake. She felt a personal responsibility for Lily that went far beyond the call of duty. That little girl and this dog had chosen her. The financial digging finally turned up a thread they could pull. One of the regular cash withdrawal locations was a small, family-owned grocery store about 10 miles from Miller's neighborhood. It was a long shot, but Maya and Mike decided to check it out. The bell above the door jingled as they walked in, the smell of fresh bread and dried spices filling the air. The elderly owner, a man named Mr. Gable, was behind the counter. When Mike showed him a photo of David Miller, his face lit up with recognition. "Oh, sure, I know him. David. Quiet fellow. Comes in every other week, like clockwork. Always buys the same things. Pasta, canned vegetables, a lot of peanut butter. Simple stuff. Mr. Gable's expression then softened with a hint of sadness. He used to bring his little girl with him sometimes. Sweet child, very quiet, just like her dad. Always held his hand. She loved those little individual yogurt cups. He always let her pick one out. Maya's heart ached at the image. It was so normal, so completely at odds with the terrified child who whispered about the rules. She showed him Lily's picture. "Is this her?" Mr. Gable nodded, his eyes crinkling. "That's her. Hasn't seen her in a few months, though. David said she was staying with family out of state. I just figured, with him being a single dad, maybe he needed a break." Single dad. The words hung in the air. They'd found no record of a mother, no birth certificate for a child named Lily Miller. It was another dead end that only led to more questions. Who was Lily's mother? Was she part of this, or was she another victim? Back at the precinct, a forensic tech was looking over the hair clip they had noted, which had been legally collected from Miller's curb after being deemed abandoned property. It was a long shot, but they were looking for any DNA, any clue. As Maya waited, she got another call from the child psychologist working with Lily. She started to draw more, the doctor said, her voice cautious. "It's the same theme. The house. The black scribble. But there's something new." She texted Maya a photo of the latest drawing. This one made Maya's blood run cold. It was the same house, the same oppressive black scribble looming over it. But this time, the two stick figures, the girl and the dog, were drawn outside of the house, and from the black scribble, a long, arm-like shape was reaching out toward them. It wasn't a drawing of the past anymore. It was a drawing of a present fear. Lily wasn't just remembering her escape. She was afraid that the darkness from that house was still coming for her. That evening, as Maya was finally forcing herself to go home and get some real sleep, her personal cell phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but her professional instinct made her swipe to accept. There was a long silence on the other end, just the sound of someone breathing. Then a calm, eerily familiar male voice spoke just 2 words before the line went dead. "Stop digging." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a threat laden with profanity. It was a quiet, simple statement, delivered with chilling certainty. He had her number. He knew who she was. He was no longer just a ghost in a house. He was watching them. 2. Maya stood frozen in the parking lot, the city lights blurring around her. The investigation had just become deeply, terrifyingly personal. David Miller wasn't just hiding. He was fighting back. And he had just drawn a line in the sand, with Maya squarely on the other side. The safety of the precinct felt 1,000,000 miles away. And for the first time, she wondered if she had truly understood what she and that little puppy had stumbled into. The silence after the call was louder than any siren. Maya stood frozen in the parking lot, the cold metal of her car door under her hand. Stop digging. Those 2 words echoed in her mind, not as a threat, but as a promise. He knew her. He had her personal number. How long had he been watching her? Did he know where she lived? A shiver that had nothing to do with the evening air traced its way down her spine. This was no longer just a case. It was a confrontation. She drove home on autopilot, her eyes constantly checking the rear-view mirror, seeing shadows in every car that lingered a little too long. Her small apartment, usually a sanctuary, felt exposed. She closed the blinds, her heart pounding as she peered through the slats into the empty street below. Sargent, who had come home with her, seemed to sense her anxiety. He pressed his warm body against her leg, a low whine in his throat. She sank to the floor, burying her hands in his soft fur, taking comfort in his simple, loyal presence. This puppy had started it all, and now he was her only comfort in the terrifying storm that was brewing. The next morning, she reported the call immediately. The precinct took it seriously. Her personal number was changed, and a patrol car was assigned to do periodic checks on her apartment. But the damage was done. The psychological line had been crossed. David Miller was no longer a suspect in a missing child case. He was an active threat, They needed something, anything, to break the case open. The warrant to search his house was still a distant dream, denied for lack of probable cause. But then, the forensic tech called with a result. The hair clip. We got a partial DNA profile. The tech said, it's definitely from a child, female. We ran it through the missing persons database, and we got a hit. Maya's breath caught. This was it. They were going to find out who Lily really was. Who is she? She asked, her pen poised over a notepad. That's the thing, the tech replied, his voice confused. The hit isn't for a Lily Miller. The match is for a child named Emma Walsh. She was reported missing from a park in a city over 200 miles away 4 years ago. The world seemed to tilt. 4 years ago, Emma Walsh. The name hung in the air, disconnected from the silent little girl they knew. Lily, Emma, she was only 2 or 3 years old when she was taken. The timeline was a nightmare. This wasn't a case of a father keeping his daughter hidden. This was a kidnapping. A long-term, meticulously planned abduction. The rules, the cash withdrawals, the sterile house, the hidden camera, it all snapped into a new, horrifying focus. David Miller wasn't a reclusive father. He was a predator who had stolen a child and hidden her in plain sight for years. But the twist, the one that left Maya and the entire department reeling, came an hour later. A detective from the other jurisdiction emailed over the original case file for Emma Walsh. As Maya scrolled through the PDF on her computer, her eyes landed on the photograph of the couple reporting their daughter missing. A young, heartbroken mother and father, their faces etched with a grief that was still raw even in the grainy scan. And the father, Maya stared, her blood turning to ice. He was younger, with more hair, but the eyes were the same. The tired, calm eyes had peered out at her from the crack in the door. The man they knew as David Miller was, in fact, Robert Walsh, Emma's biological father. The room buzzed around her, but Maya heard none of it. This changed everything. He wasn't a random kidnapper. He was her dad. This was a parental abduction. But the rules, the fear, the controlled terror Lily Emma had lived in, that was real. Why would a father inflict that on his own child? What had happened 4 years ago that made him take her and vanish, creating a prison of silence and fear for his own daughter? The mystery had just deepened, twisting into something far more complex and tragic. They had found the source of the black scribble in Lily's drawing. It was wearing the face of the man who was supposed to love and protect her, and he knew they were closing in. The revelation hit the precinct like a shockwave. The man they knew as David Miller was Robert Walsh, a father who had vanished with his own daughter. The case file from 4 years ago painted a picture of a bitter custody battle, but nothing that explained the level of fear they saw in Lily. In Emma, there were no reports of abuse, just 2 parents fighting for their child. So why had he built a prison of silence? Why the rules? The stop digging call now felt even more desperate. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a cornered man protecting a terrible secret. They had everything they needed for a warrant now. The confirmed identity of a missing child, the threatening call to an officer. It was granted immediately. As the SWAT team assembled and detectives prepared to move, Maya sat in the quiet interview room with Emma. The little girl was coloring, Sergeant asleep at her feet. Emma, Maya said softly, using her real name for the first time. The girl's head snapped up, her eyes wide with something more than surprise. It was recognition. She knew that name. We're going to see your dad today, Maya continued, choosing her words with immense care. Is there anything you want to tell him? Emma looked down at her drawing, a fresh piece of paper with a bright, yellow sun she had just added. She didn't speak, but she slowly slid the drawing across the table to Maya. It was a house and the black scribble. But this time, she had drawn the little girl's stick figure holding the hand of a new, larger stick figure with a kind smile, standing between her and the scribble. The new figure had a star on its chest, a police officer. She was pointing at Maya. Tears welled in Maya's eyes as she folded the drawing and placed it in her vest. I understand, she whispered. The raid on the house was swift and anticlimactic. Robert Walsh offered no resistance. He was sitting at his kitchen table, a single suitcase packed beside him. as if he had been waiting for the end. He looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, as he was read his rights. His eyes were empty. He had lost his daughter, and now he had lost the twisted world he had built for them. But back at the station, in the stark, bright light of the interrogation room, the final, heartbreaking truth came out. It wasn't the story of a monster. It was a story of a man broken by grief and fear. For years ago, his wife, Emma's mother, had been diagnosed with severe, unpredictable mental illness. She had never been violent towards Emma, but she had become a danger to herself, her paranoia and delusions creating a chaotic and frightening home. The courts, he claimed, hadn't taken him seriously. He was terrified they would grant his unstable wife visitation or even custody, putting Emma in real danger. So he made the most desperate decision of his life. He ran. He created new identities, new rules, all designed to make them invisible. The rules were to keep them safe, to keep them from being found. The silence was a shield. He had stolen his daughter's childhood not out of malice, but out of a twisted, catastrophic form of love. He was still going to prison. The law was clear. But as Maya listened, the black and white case bled into devastating shades of gray. He was a kidnapper, but he was also a father who had, in his own terribly flawed way, believed he was protector. The climax came not with a bang, but with a quiet meeting in a foster care visitation room. Emma's mother, Susan, had been located. She had spent years in therapy, stable now on medication, her life a hollowed-out shell of hope and loss. Maya stood with Emma, holding her hand, Sargent on a leash beside them. The door opened. Susan Walsh stood there, her hands trembling, her face a map of 4 years of anguish. "Emma?" she whispered, the name a prayer. Emma stared, her little body rigid. She looked at the woman, then down at Sargent, then up at Maya. Maya gave her hand a small, reassuring squeeze. And then Emma let go. She took one small step forward, then another, and then she ran, crashing into her mother's waiting arms. The sound that came from Susan was one of pure, unbreakable joy, a sob of release that echoed in the small room. They held each other, a missing piece of the world finally clicking back into place. Later, as Maya sat on the steps outside the station, emotionally drained, Sargent laid his head in her lap. The case was closed. A family was, in some broken way, beginning to heal. A man faced the consequences of his choices. But as she looked down at the loyal puppy who had started it all, she knew the story wasn't over for her. She had gone into this job to protect people, to find the truth, and the truth she had found was messier and more human than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't about heroes and villains. It was about a little girl who was finally safe, a mother who got a second chance, and a father whose love had become a prison. And as Sargent licked her hand, she knew she had found a new partner, a furry, four-legged reminder that sometimes the bravest souls come in the smallest packages, and the most complicated stories often have the simplest beginning, a puppy who refused to give up on his friend. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and quiet emotions. Robert Walsh was formally charged, his future a long, bleak road through the justice system. Emma was placed in a temporary foster home while Child Services worked with her mother, Susan, on a careful, gradual reunification plan. It was a happy ending, Maya told herself, the best one that could be hoped for under the circumstances. But a small, unsettled feeling still nagged at her, a loose thread in the back of her mind. It was Sargent who pointed it out in his own way. He'd been officially adopted by the precinct, but he'd chosen Maya as his person. He followed her everywhere. One evening, as she was packing up to go home, he started whining and scratching at the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, the one where she kept the personal effects from the case. "What is it, boy?" she asked, tired. He just looked at her, his tail giving a single insistent thump. She opened the drawer. Inside was the plastic evidence bag containing the few things from Emma's time in the warehouse, the old blanket and the small, bright hair clip they had seen in Robert's hallway. Sargent nudged the bag with his nose and whined again. It was the same determined whine he'd used when leading her to the warehouse. A cold prickle ran down Maya's spine. This wasn't just a dog wanting to play. He was trying to tell her something. She pulled out the hair clip. It was a simple butterfly-shaped clip, the kind sold in packs of a dozen. She turned it over in her hand. Why was this so important to him? She remembered Robert's panic reaction when he saw her looking at it. At the time, she thought it was because it proved a child lived there. But now, she looked more closely. Tucked almost invisibly into the hinge of the clip was a tiny, rolled-up piece of paper. Her heart began to pound. How had forensics missed this? With trembling fingers, she used a pair of tweezers to carefully work the tiny scroll free. It was no bigger than a matchstick. She unrolled it on her desk under the lamp. The handwriting was neat, tiny, and frantic. Asterisk, he's not my dad. My mom told me his name was Robert. He took me from the park. My real name is Sophie. My mom's name is Anna. Please find her. He has pictures of other girls. Asterisk. The world stopped. The air left Maya's lungs. Robert Walsh wasn't a desperate father. He was a stranger, a predator who had stolen a little girl named Sophie and spent 4 years brainwashing her into being his silent, perfect daughter, Emma. He had lied about everything. The story about the mother's mental illness was a clever, pre-planned narrative, a shield he'd built to explain away any trauma or fear he inflicted. He had researched the real Robert Walsh and his missing daughter, Emma, and used their tragedy to create an unshakable cover story for himself. He was a ghost who had stolen another ghost's identity. Maya's mind raced, connecting the horrifying dots. The rules weren't to keep them safe from a broken system. They were to keep Sophie isolated, controlled, and silent. His panic at the hair clip wasn't about being caught with a child. It was about being caught with the secret she carried. He hadn't been trying to protect his daughter. He had been protecting his secret. She immediately called the lead detective, her voice shaking as she explained the devastating twist. Within an hour, they were back in the interrogation room. The tiny note placed in front of the man they had called Robert Walsh. All the color drained from his face. The defeated father act vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. He said nothing, but his eyes, for the first time, showed genuine fear. The game was up. The real work began again, this time with a new name, Sophie. They found her mother, Anna, living in a different state, her life frozen in grief. The reunion, over a video call, was a torrent of tears and disbelief. The little girl who had been so quiet, so careful, finally saw her true face reflected in her mother's eyes. Sophie, her mother wept. My Sophie. Later that night, Maya sat on her couch, Sergeant curled up beside her, his head heavy on her lap. She thought about the incredible courage of that little girl. For years, she had lived in a cage of lies, yet she never gave up. She had hidden a message, a tiny seed of truth, waiting for her chance. And she had a friend, a loyal German Shepherd puppy, who somehow understood that a piece of the puzzle was still missing. He hadn't just led Maya to a child in a warehouse. He had led her all the way to the final, hidden truth. The case was truly closed now. A monster was behind bars. A little girl was finally going home. And a mother's endless nightmare was over. And as she stroked Sergeant's fur, Maya knew that some bonds, the ones forged in trust and silence, were the strongest of all. The news didn't just spread to the precinct. It seemed to change the very air. The man they had known as Robert Walsh refused to speak another word. But they didn't need his confession. The tiny note, combined with frantic search of his hard drives, revealed the horrifying truth. His real name was Martin Croft. He was a ghost, a man with no prior record, who had meticulously planned the abduction of a child, studying the real missing persons case of Emma Walsh to create a perfect, heartbreaking alibi. The rules, the silence, the controlled environment. It was all a calculated method to break a little girl's spirit and rebuild her as his own. He wasn't a flawed father. He was a predator of the most cold and cunning kind. For Sophie, the days that followed were a slow, gentle unraveling of the prison she had lived in for so long. The quiet, fearful child named Emma began to recede, like a shadow fading in the morning sun. In a quiet room at the Child Advocacy Center, with her real mother, Anna, sitting beside her holding her hand, Sophie started to talk. The words came out in a soft, hesitant trickle at first. Stories about her real home, her old bedroom with the yellow curtains, the dog they had when she was a toddler. She talked about the man Martin and the rules. No speaking unless spoken to. No crying. No looking out the windows. And always, always call him Dad. She described the terrifying day he took her from the park, a memory she had buried deep inside for years. Anna listened, her tears a quiet release of 4 years of anguish, her grip on her daughter's hand a silent promise that she would never let go again. Maya was there for some of those sessions, a quiet observer. She watched as Sophie's drawings changed. The lopsided house and the black scribble were gone. Now, she drew pictures of her mother, of the home she was about to return to, and of a police officer and a dog. She always gave those drawings to Maya. "For you and Sergeant," she'd say, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. It was in one of these moments, as Sophie was coloring a picture of a bright, sunny day, that she looked up at Maya and asked, "Can Sergeant come visit me sometimes?" The question caught Maya off guard, a lump forming in her throat. She looked over at Anna, who nodded, her own eyes shining with gratitude. "Of course he can, sweetheart," Maya said. "We both will." The legal proceedings moved quickly after that. Martin Croft was denied bail, facing a mountain of evidence and a lifetime in prison. There were no more twists, no more shocking reveals. The monster was securely locked away, and the focus shifted entirely to healing. A few weeks later, Maya and Sergeant stood on the front porch of a small, cozy house in a neighboring state. The garden was bursting with summer flowers, and a welcome home banner was strung across the door. Anna opened the door, her face radiant with a peace that had been missing for so long. Behind her, Sophie peeked out, and upon seeing Sergeant, she broke into a wide, unreserved grin. She knelt down, and the puppy, wiggling with excitement, covered her face in happy, slobbery kisses. The sound of her laughter, bright and unafraid, was the most beautiful sound Maya had ever heard. Inside, over lemonade, Anna told Maya the rest of the story. The years of searching, the endless vigils, the slow, crushing weight of hope fading. "I never gave up," she whispered, her hand resting on Sophie's head as the girl played with Sergeant on the living room rug. "But some days, it was so hard to remember her smile. Now I get to see it every day." As Maya got ready to leave, Sophie ran up and hugged her tightly around the waist. "Thank you for finding my message," she whispered. Then she crouched down and wrapped her arms around Sergeant's neck. "And thank you for finding me." The drive back felt different. The world outside the car window seemed brighter, the colors more vivid. Sergeant slept in the passenger seat, exhausted and happy. Maya thought about the incredible journey from a cold, rainy parking lot to this warm, sun-drenched porch. It wasn't just a case she had closed. It was a life she had helped piece back together. Back at her apartment, the silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Sergeant curled up on his dog bed with a contented sigh, and Maya sat down beside him, running her hand over his soft ears. This little creature, who had been so determined and brave, had not only saved a little girl twice. First by finding help, and then by pointing the final clue, he had also found a forever home with her. He had reminded her why she wore the badge, not just to catch the bad guys, but to fight for the good ones, for the Sophies and the Annas of the world. The story of the little German shepherd puppy who followed a police officer for help was now complete. It was a story of unspeakable cruelty, but also of unbreakable courage. It was a reminder that even in the darkest corners, a spark of hope can remain hidden, waiting for the right moment to be found. And sometimes, that spark is carried on four paws, with a wagging tail and a heart full of loyalty, leading the way home.